All right, folks, we are very honored today to have Arny Ferrando. He's never let me call him doctor, so I'm not going to start now. A world-leading expert in muscle metabolism and aging, currently out of University of Arkansas Medical Sciences. We've got tons of stuff to cover today, but I don't want to shortchange the biographical stuff because it's so damn interesting. Your career started off at West Point, included a ranger school, NASA. Tell us about those early experiences and how it shaped your career trajectory and research.
Hmm. There's something I don't get asked often. Well, I was between active duty and active reserve. I had like 22 and a half years in uh, for retirement purposes. And most of that was as a pilot, which I love doing. I was very fortunate to fly. And and of course I was an athlete in high school and college and most of my life. So it was kind of I guess without knowing it, I had an interest in physiology, in human performance and physiology. And so that's what kind of led me that direction, I think. So I decided, at some point, I started graduate school, like, I think it was 10 years after I graduated from the academy. I started graduate school. So I started heading that way. It was a dual track for quite some time. There's playing, uh, being a reservist, an active reservist for a period of time, at the same time trying to be a scientist, developing that career. But I've had the fortune now of bringing things full circle. In other words, all the things I went through in the military and understanding the stress physiology, especially from a clinical standpoint, that was my early work uh, in medicine and in clinical medicine. But the stress physiology was always of interest to me, and so now it's literally come full circle where now the things that we're looking to do is improve the cognitive and physiological resilience of pilots. So we have a couple efforts now directed in that direction. So that's kind of, it's just all about performance, I think. It's all about maintaining performance, however you define performance. Most people think athletic performance and all, and which is certainly true, but as you know, that's a short that's a short window in your life, right? I mean, like I said, we can be athletes all our life, but you can really be only an athlete at a higher level for a short period of time. Let's face it. So, but you have to perform like as a pilot, as a engineer, whatever, for a good part of your life. So that's kind of what brought me here.
Yeah, like I like to tell people, if you get paid for your mental and physical performance, you're an athlete in some capacity. So, in some ways, it never ends. Uh, as you know, most of my guys are, I work exclusively with 40-plus-year-old male senior professionals. So let's just jump into what everybody's curious about: testosterone replacement therapy. Why, when, how, and how much?
Yeah. So a lot of work. We did a lot of the initial work in terms of metabolic effects of testosterone, both in like burn patients and young and older adults. So, we really did a great job, I think, foundationally of characterizing the effect of testosterone on muscle protein turnover and whole body protein turnover. So, but it was Shally Begin who's in Boston that has really done the preponderance of the clinical work, and he's done an outstanding job. He's had a number of, I think, contiguous NIH projects uh, showing the use of testosterone. Everything from his foundational study at the beginning, looking at where he kind of used uh, uh, Lupron to mitigate testosterone production, and then replaced 50, 100, 200, 400, 600, I think it was. A pretty elegant study showing the effects of strength, lean mass, et cetera, et cetera. So, but he has done a lot of work since then, looking at the longitudinal aspect of that, showing the safety, the efficacy, and the potential issues with it. I think people have to realize that when you start talking about testosterone, that the medical community is not like spring loaded to do that. in other words, if you went to the doc and he or she measured your testosterone and found it was like 200, which is low for normal. Um, he wouldn't say, Andy, we need to start you on testosterone. He would just wouldn't say that unless you came and you complained, doc, I'm tired, I'm not recovering, blah blah blah, my mind's fog, on and on and on. Then he'd take a look at it. So in other words, if you're non-symptomatic, if you're asymptomatic, it's not an automatic, clinical treatment. Um, Keep in mind that the TRT stands for, the R stands for replacement. Okay. So you're replacing exogenously what the body can no longer produce endogenously. Okay. So the idea is I always say what we did in our early studies is we made 65-year-old men 35 or 40 again. So it was within the normal range, but we brought them from like 300 to like 500 something. Okay. And just staying within the normal range, you get a dramatic physiological benefit. Okay. And in fact, we just finished a study that's been dragging through all the manuscript, but it's ready to be pushed out, where we called it Ops 2. It was in conjunction with Usarium and Stefan Poziakos, who I'm sure you know. Um, and I was looking at, it was done at the Pennington Research Center, and we took guys and it was a randomized controlled trial, placebo controlled, and we brought them through several phases of where we like an initial phase, and then we beat the shit out of them for a certain period of time, deprived them sleep, a lot of exercise, and then the recovery period. And one thing that we notice, which is consistent, is that all we did with the testosterone was again elevated within the normal range. We use this testosterone undecanoate, which was a little longer lasting. And by doing that, we were able to preserve lean mass throughout that because of that. So, um, again, I want to emphasize it's a replacement paradigm, and it's a replacement, and the idea is to get you back up into the normal range so that you can benefit from all the physiological aspects of testosterone, which, by the way, most tissues in the body have receptors for testosterone. We always think muscle, but of course bone is very important, skin is very important. All these things that most people don't think of are target sites also for testosterone. So when that's lost in the body entirely, um, that's why you see a lot of clinical manifestations. But I know just as many people who have very low testosterone values and don't complain a bit of any issues or side effects. So again, I think you have to understand, like, if somebody's going to go that direction, it's not because you want to perform better. This is not performance enhancement testosterone. This is not PEDs. Okay. With TRT, it's actually you'd utilize it if your body cannot make it in satisfactory amounts, and you would replace what the body should be making. That's the bottom line of that. And again, I think it's quite efficacious. There's many people on it for many years, and um, I think that the side effects that Shalley found, like he found increased cardiovascular risk, but it wasn't in an active population. It was just in your general American land squid population. So I think that if somebody remains active, it's like anything else. Activity solves many problems of the human body, the human malaise.
So it sounds like it's symptomatically determined. If you're dragging and testosterone's the culprit, then that's when it might be time to go in and get it.
Yeah, and that's right. If you're dragging, like, here's the thing, like I say this, like people like you and I, it would manifest more openly in us because we're kind of taxing the physiology. I know you're not a lot younger than I am, but the point is when you're constantly active, you're constantly exercising, and you realize, I'm not recovering. I'm dragging. I'm dragging. That's what I kept saying to my doc, who's actually a friend of mine, is on the same floor as my research lab. And his answer was, well, you're just getting freaking old. You're just old. And I'm like, oh, doc, that's not really the answer I wanted. I get that, but it's not really. And so, to his credit, it's like, okay, let's do the blood work, and that we headed that direction. So it is very restorative in that regard. Kind of gives you life back if you're going to remain active. And I said most people don't see that because, look at our society. Most people aren't active. I've said this a million times, and DC is tired of hearing it. My colleague there, David Church, it's just like anytime you've used, anytime we, the scientific community, have used exercise, it's been beneficial. I don't care whether it's Parkinson's, it's cancer, whatever it is, it's been beneficial, but nobody does it. So why do you think glips and jips and everything else is so prevalent? It's still the same, the doctors would say the same thing, diet and exercise, but nobody does it. Nobody does it. So,
Diet and exercise, hid it in plain sight.
yeah, exactly, but nobody wants to do it. You know what I'm saying? It's easier, give me a pill, give me a shot.
Exactly. So related to TRT, sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss. Apparently, it was just World Sarcopenia Day. I missed it because every day is Sarcopenia Day with me. What do aging men over 40, need to know about resistance training, age-related muscle loss, nutrition, and particularly one of your many areas of expertise, protein?
Yeah, well, I've said this a number of times before too. Nothing gets better with aging. All right. That old fine wine bullshit is just that. There's nothing that gets better with aging. Now, I get it, like other aspects of our life, et cetera, do, but physiology is not meant to get better with aging. I think that's the cruel truth of the human biology. You know, physiologically, the systems do not get better, they get worse. And so you have to be mindful of how do I mitigate those declines and how do I make up for those declines? And all these things will help you do that. Exercise, motion is lotion. The human body is made to move. The problem is in our very opulent society, if you will, you know what I mean? We're so lucky, so rich. I mean, and have so many things at our disposal. It's not an active society anymore. We're no longer hunter gatherers. We're no longer having to hunt for our food. Even Europe, for example, I have family in Italy, and many years ago when I'd go over to visit and all that stuff. Everybody walks to the center of town. They get their grocery, they walk back. That walking, they don't take a car, they walk. Uh, but that walking is the 500 calories a day that you need to keep your weight under control. And now I see that for some odd reason, they want to become more like Americans. So fast food, all that crap is infiltrating the European community. And, you're starting to see more American looking Europeans because of that.
Oh
So,
yes, I
go
just got back from your ancestral homeland, Italy, and I almost didn't come home. It's a pretty easy country to fall in love with. If there's bad food there, I didn't find it. It's all fresh, portion control. They eat great food, but they don't. It's not a 2,500 calorie.
That's right.
Super,
That's right.
super.
Portion control, you're right, is important because if food is wonderful, it's fresh, etcetera, but you don't get like 800 calories in one setting, you know what I mean? It's just not like that. So, yeah, you're exactly right, and we just haven't seemed to, and even if you go to an Italian restaurant in America, for the most part, you get these huge proportions, you know what I mean? These huge servings. I don't know what it is.
Air quotes Italian restaurant.
Yeah, yeah, right, exactly. Air quotes. Yeah.
Eh, yes. Uh, I'm fascinated the work you've done with tactical athletes, in particular special operations soldiers. There's a lot of carryover to my guys, executives, entrepreneurs, sleep deprived, jet lagged, overworked, overstressed. So obviously the first answer is don't, but if you can't avoid it, what are the must do, what is stress, sleep deprivation do to physiology and performance? And if you can't avoid it, what are the must dos that you must do to mitigate the risk?
Yeah, that's the fact that I mean, in a military setting, like you you can't get to sleep. I mean, that's not the way the op tempo isn't there. Say, oh, we're holding off on this operation. Everybody get 4 hours of sleep. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. Okay. Um, so in the real world, even in like civilian world, and even in aviation in the military, there was a movement towards what they call crew rest. So in other words, encouraging sufficient rest to be um, at your best in the cockpit. The cockpit is a very, very stressful environment. People don't get that because people think, oh, it's just flying. when in reality, it's everything but flying. Okay. In other words, you have to be able to fly well enough so it becomes so second. It's like you driving a car, Andy. If I said, okay, you drive a car and we're gonna have a conversation in that, the, the conversation, everything else is primary. Just driving the car, it has to be secondary, right? You're not really focused on, okay, now accelerate the gas. Now, you know what I mean? So it's very much like that in flying. The flying is the mission. So there's a lot of things going on, whether you're firing weapons or coordinating and fire weapons or coordinating other aircraft. I mean, all that radios. I mean, all that comes first and foremost. So that in itself is a major stressor, and then when you start tinkering with the physiology, things only get worse. And what we found is, just like that data I showed at ISSN, is that anytime you stress the physiology, in particular, you take in less calories than you should be, which is another aspect of what we call sustained operations. You just don't have time to eat. You grab something, shove it down your throat, but it's not, the 2,500 calories a day that you need. Um, and the way we approached that was like, okay, if we're going to approach this from a supplementation standpoint, like how many essential amino acids do we need to offset this loss of protein? And as you see, for the most part, it's like a 24, 25 grams of EAAs. So, which isn't too hard to get if you're supplementing. If you're trying to get it in food, it's a little more difficult. But if it's just a supplement, it can be taken in fairly easily. So, those are things that help, but you can only deficit spend the physiology for so long. In other words, you can only go so long without sleep, so long without eating, so long because again, the physiology will break down. I mean, at some point, you're just not as effective. And when you talk about special operators, that's really what they're good at. They're good at being miserable and being extremely good while they're miserable. I don't think people realize that, you know what I mean? They're really good at being miserable. They're good at being cold, wet, hungry, tired, etc., but yet totally mission focused. I mean, these are special people. It's probably why they call them special operators, but they're special people, and that's why, you ought to be glad we have those types of people. Not everybody can be one. But again, you know, uh, you're always at the limits of physiology.
Well, I'm glad you brought up essential amino acids since I've been learning from you and following you. That's one of the things that I started supplementing with. So, especially when I'm trying to recover, when I have an injury, when I can't have a full meal, I at least try to slug down some essential amino acids. Uh, there's make, model, and vintage matter though. There's actually it's the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences patent that, has, I think, 50 plus peer-reviewed studies behind it. So I
Well, that's not quite true. There are peer-reviewed studies that so what how that was derived, by the way, was it was derived over like 25 clinical trials and I don't know how many millions of dollars of funding. So we started off in the early days saying, I wonder what the optimal provision of amino acids would be for skeletal muscle. And way back when, as a young faculty, I think, we took skeletal muscle that we got from a biopsy and we hydrolyzed it. And then we looked at the amino acid content and that's where we started. We're thinking, okay, if this is what muscle is made of, if you provide this, that would be all you need, which of course was not true, okay? And it wasn't true because there's a number of other variables in that equation, right? Transport systems, transport through the interstitium. These are all things that we did over those 25 clinical trials with some elaborate techniques of stable isotopes and cross-limb balance models and all these things. So each study was a refinement and a tweaking, including one of at the time was a postdoc, he's now a professor out in Arizona, Christos Katsanos, did a study showing we'd use 7 grams in young population, 7 grams in older population, and the young population had a much greater stimulation of muscle protein synthesis than the older. And when we increased the leucine content, which is what ended up the formula being, when we increased the leucine content 40 some percent, we got the same result, meaning that the older population need a higher percentage of leucine. So you see how that evolved. I mean, I don't think people have an appreciation. It was truly an evolution of things. And why, when you increase one, you adjust others, blah, blah, blah. So there wasn't an ad infinitum testing of each amino acid in each range. It didn't quite work that way. It was more their definitive effects on physiology. Okay. And that's how we tweaked. And so we arrived at a formula, which I had an NIH grant that tested it in arthroplasty patients, knee and hip arthroplasty, and found an improvement in muscle strength after arthroplasty with the amino acids, and kind of went down the road from that in terms of patenting, et cetera.
Yeah, that's really been a fascinating aspect of my journey, actually. That supplement detective work. Uh, what are you actually putting in your body? And sometimes when I follow the science behind some of these supplements, the trail goes cold pretty quickly.
Yeah, there is no science. I mean, I've always said that there, when you look at what in our supplement world, like creatine far and away has probably the most research behind it. I would say BCAs has some, but that's not very efficacious, despite a few studies, I think, erroneously. And then EAAs, uh, beta alanine, maybe another one that has, but you're right. For the most part, 99 out of every 100 supplements out there have no, despite clinically tested and all the other bullshit that goes along with it, there's no real science behind it. Nobody pays for that, Andy. That's the problem. I mean, some manufacturer has to pay for that. Some do, and I admire those who do, and then they can make the claims accordingly. But a lot of people just borrow from the existing research in one form or another.
Why spend money on research when we can spend it on marketing, right?
Roger that. As you know, marketing is the tail that wags the dog, and
Exactly. Uh, so let's have a little nerd out on some science. I tried, as you know, I try to follow the exercise science, the research, and I try to apply it in my own programming and my clients' programming. And sometimes I get I can't always translate the science to practice. So I'll give you an example. Leg extensions. When I go to research muscle protein synthesis, everybody does leg extensions, and I'm like, what the hell? I don't even do leg extensions. There's a whole rest of the body to worry about. So why do scientists love leg extensions so damn much?
well, because we biopsy the vastus lateralis, okay, and that's involved in leg extensions. But in fairness, if you look at our early studies from Galveston, we actually did leg presses also. So the bottom line was the involvement of the vastus lateralis, because that could be biopsied safely. The reason we always chose the vastus lateralis, Andy, is because it's very easy to get to, and there's no major vessels or anything there. All the vessels are medial, so it's very easy to get in. Local anesthesia, small incision, get a nice muscle sample, glue it up. Life's good. So that's why. I mean, in my career, I've biopsied. Geez, I biopsied the soleus, the gastroc, the posterior deltoid, abdomen, vastus lateralis. What else am I mean, so in other words, other things can be done, but the point is that by far and away, again, 99 out of every 100 studies would have just used, unless there was a reason to do a different muscle type, the vastus lateralis. Hence the extensions. That's why.
So um it's a matter of convenience, easiest muscle.
Roger that. Roger that.
So that takes care of the muscle protein synthesis part of the puzzle. But building and maintaining muscle is a two-way street, so we're constantly building muscle and it's constantly breaking down. I liked your example of burn units for why muscle protein synthesis isn't the whole story. Could you elaborate on that for our listeners?
Yeah, it's actually the balance between the 2. I mean, that's why I say this. What I hear all the time in the lay world is, anabolism. They act like it's a switch, like you walk into the room and throw the light switch on. It's not a switch at all. It's a rheostat. It's a dimmer switch. That's the way I look at it. The process of breakdown and synthesis occurring constantly. It's how you balance that out. Okay, so obviously when you're fasted, breakdown from the muscle exceeds synthesis. The muscle effluxes essential amino acids. You feed, now there's more essential amino acids. Now there's a greater influx into the muscle, and there's a greater synthesis to breakdown ratio. Do you see how that goes? So when you think about the 24-hour human condition, it's constantly adjusting that rheostat switch.
So they another part of the building on that catabolism story, can you explain to our listeners what's really going on with when we take testosterone or anabolic steroids?
Yeah, testosterone. The advantage of testosterone is, um, it actually. I've shown this uh, several times now, and quite clearly. It showed it in healthy young men, healthy older men, and burn patients, and we just showed it again in this paper that's coming out in that ops two where we had the sustained operations and beat the shit out of those guys. Um, the great thing about testosterone is improves it improves the maintenance of intracellular amino acids. And so what happens is in the fasted state, very little works in the fasted state, but testosterone works in the fasted state. Instead of those amino acids effluxing out to the body for other things, more of them are reincorporated into protein. More of them go from protein breakdown into the intracellular port and back into protein synthesis rather than go out. I have a very nice paper in I think it's the journal surgery journal, maybe early 2000s or something, showing that, and also I think one around that time frame in young controls that showed that, because we use the cross limb balance method, and we were able to actually look at that without boring you or your audience too much. We had a way of looking, following the amino acid kinetics, so we could actually tell like how much was coming from the artery into the muscle, how much was staying in the muscle, how much was efflux. We could characterize all those kinetics. The bottom line is it improves the synthesis to breakdown ratio. That's where testosterone works its magic.
So we were talking about before, little side note, supplements that actually have some science behind them. What do you think about HMB for anti-catabolism?
Yeah, I know there's some studies done on that, but and I know that some of them are shown efficacious, but I just had this argument with somebody before. The effect is not that dramatic. You know what I'm saying? So again, to me, it's ROI. Like you can pound all the supplements you want, and if that's what you want, that's fine. But to me, like the EAAs have the ROI. They're very easy to take. They're fairly inexpensive. They taste good. I can drink them anytime, anywhere, before workout, during workout, after workout. You know what I mean? So, and they have a very dramatic metabolic effect by all our data and others. So, that's why I would say I know the magnitude of increase in anabolism when I take 15 grams of essential amino acids. The degree of anabolism with HMB isn't that clear. So that's what I say. I'm not dissing HMB, so I hope none of your readers, I get hate mail or anything. I'm not on social media anyhow, I don't give a shit. But my point is that, you know, I'm not trying to start a fight here. I'm just saying from a data standpoint, if I'm going to do something, it's going to be something with an ROI, right? It's going to have some magnitude of effect. Like testosterone has an order of magnitude effect. EAAs have a magnitude effect. Uh, Creatine taken over a period of time has been shown to, dramatically improve everything from muscle, bone, proteostasis, now memory, sleep, etc. So, quite a bit of positive data in that regard.
Okay, so it goes back to the truism. If it works, it's probably banned. If it's not banned, it's probably work.
Well, there again, the notable exceptions, right? Creatine is
Yes.
um, I guess beta alanine has efficacy to it, and HMB does too. In all honesty, those are the top four that always come to mind.
So let's expand on that anabolism. You really expanded my thinking with what I call your four quadrant model. The individual muscle protein synthesis and breakdown, and then the whole body protein synthesis and breakdown. And to really understand what's going on with the whole body, you need to put those four pieces together. So why don't more people do that?
Well, it's hard. It's hard to do and it's expensive. It's like anything else. And, I think, like I mentioned in the talk there, Andy, like 3 of those could be fairly easily ascertained. Synthesis with an infusion of a tracer, and then you take a biopsy and look at the amount of tracer in there, calculate synthesis in, like, percent per hour. And then you can look at whole body synthesis, whole body breakdown with an oral ingestion. So but the only problem with breakdown is we never really figured out a way to do it after an intervention, okay? All the methods we had were in a fasted state, and then we've used that for testosterone, I've used that in surgery, those things that work very well, okay? So, like in surgery, I had the whole picture, for example, because they were fasted. But the minute you add food or amino acids or something like that, all the assumptions of that breakdown model kinda disappear. So that's what I was saying. You can at least get 3 of the 4 variables in that equation. And my point of that talk was the more of those you can characterize, the better you can ascertain the physiological response. So the problem is that, um, a lot of people have made the mistake of looking at, muscle protein synthesis and making these, and I reviewed a good bit of this too, and making great anabolic claims on intervention X, because they improve muscle protein synthesis. And, to a certain degree, you can say there's an upregulation of protein turnover, but again, anabolism is synthesis minus breakdown. So you really can't get to that final claim until you have both variables there or extrapolate out long enough. If you extrapolate out long enough, you don't need a tracer study, right? You just, do something for 8, 12, 16 weeks and then measure lean mass, function, strength, et cetera, et cetera.
So it kind of goes back to the old drunk under the streetlight analogy. So why is the drunk looking for his keys under the streetlight? Well, because that's where the light is. We know how to measure muscle protein synthesis. We like it when we come up to our dissertation. When we come up to our tenure committees for review, we have lots of these muscle protein synthesis studies to show. So
There's certainly truth to that.
yeah, so that's um, frontiers for further research. Uh, and I apologies. I'm having. Hopefully, it's not too distracting. I'm having some technical issues on my end, but I appreciate your
No, that's okay. Whenever you just let me know.
range bearing with me. I like your phrase, peeing in the ocean and rising sea levels. We talked about it in the context of estrogens in the water and food supply. What are some other distractors in health and fitness? Things that have a plausible theoretical mechanism, but in practice aren't needle movers.
I don't know. I think the problem is that the lay public is inundated with that. Everything from climate control to political narratives to, what you should eat and drugs you should take. I just, it's hard if you're not familiar, with that area. What do you believe? I feel sorry for people, right? I mean, um, well, I'll give you a perfect example. Like, I've had to rely on somebody throughout my life that I trusted. I mean, I could do reading on my own. I'm not entirely a moron, but the financial world, I mean, it's not what I pay attention to every day, right? So you're stuck with, trusting somebody with your financial future, like, hey, here's a place to think about, et cetera, et cetera. Or, you ride the stock market over 50 years and hope you smile at the end. So I think you're right. There's just a lot of misinformation out there and people, and I think social media is a very much a double-edged sword, but I think it's cutting deeper than it should, you know what I mean? Because everybody was something to sell. "Dude, my wife does this to me." "Oh, I saw this, I saw that." Well, where did you find that? You know what I mean? Because I said, "Look at the website. If it's a product they're selling, of course it's the best thing in the world, right? Of course it'll do everything to make you taller, younger, better looking, et cetera, et cetera." So, you know, you just have to be able to sort that stuff out, and most people don't have the background or won't take the time to figure that out. So that's perhaps why they go to guys like you to say, "Hey, Andy, train me. Hey, what should I eat? What should I do? They're putting their lives in your hands. And there's a lot of Andys at ISSN, as you know. There's a lot of people that people come to and rely upon to help them navigate this world.
I like your example of finances because I came from that world. I was a banker for 2 decades before taking the plunge. You full time and yes, trust me, you do not want to see that sausage being made.
Yeah, no, I'm sure of it. Yeah, exactly. But it is a good analogy. Again, you inevitably at some point you can't be an expert on everything. You can be smart, like Hector Lopez, one of the smartest guys I knew, but he wasn't an expert on everything. You know what I mean? You just can't do that. You only have 24 hours in a day and you gotta sleep some of it. So inevitably you're stuck trusting somebody else in that field for good advice and for good direction. Again, Andy, that's what you're for.
That's why we make the big bucks, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's it.
So let's talk about the future. What does the next decade look like? What are the breakthroughs on the horizon that you're looking at?
Yeah, I that's a good question too. I don't know. I mean, I think acceptance. The problem is like back to the EAAs. I've been working on them so long, and I've seen so much efficacy. But again, the country is again geared towards a drug. It's not the Food and Drug Administration, it's the Drug Administration. Everything is geared towards pharma. Pharma owns this world, not nutrition. Nobody cares about that. It's pharma that owns this world. It's pharma that owns DC. It's pharma that owns the Beltway. I mean, on and on and on. I'm not going to get political on the thing, but that's the reality of things. So, everybody's looking for the next drug. And to the point, again, go back to glip chip RAs, right? It's like, give me a drug to lose weight. I'm obese, but give me a drug to lose weight. I don't want to diet and exercise. I want to eat what I want. I would still lose weight. So again, that all ties in together. And I think that to me, that's kind of the most disturbing aspect of that because these other things that we found in nutrition to be efficacious over the years don't get enough um, they don't get enough play, they don't get enough attention, and they don't because nobody's making gabillions off of it. A drug makes gabillions, not 100 million. It makes 100 billion. You know what I'm saying? So, you're not getting that off amino acids. So that's the problem with people hear this drug, that drug, this drug. And by the way, since I've been in this, the pharma has looked for some sort of anabolic agent, anti-myostatin, SARM, for years and years and years. In fact, Marcus and Bauman and I, a number of years back, were approached on I think it was an anti-myostatin product. There's none. There's none. Okay, what's that tell you? Oh, we have animal data. It's always a state secret. You know what I mean? They always redact. It's like CIA statement or something. You never know what to make of the damn thing. So, but the problem is that they're not there. They're just not there. Okay, and some companies I know of have spent hundreds of millions of dollars investigating, and all of a sudden they just cut it all. They just drop it. Nothing's there. They call their people up and tell them on Friday, don't show up on Monday. Your division is cut. I know. I have a physician I worked with. It was exactly that way. So, that's just not the answer. And that's who I was hoping that RFK would, you know, take a more global look at what's beneficial to Americans, to humankind, not just like, okay, what drug are we after next? What's going to help us? Because I think he's of the mindset that there's a lot of great nutritional um, products, ideas, aspects that will improve, the human condition rather than rely entirely on drugs. Obviously, I think we need both. But did you lose something there? I heard a dong. Did we stop recording something?
No, we're still recording. Another dong. So yes, it's luckily I can make my living as a exercise and strength coach and don't have to rely on my audio visual skills for for a living.
I get that, I get that.
So in the time remaining, it's too damn good of a story not to share. Uh, one day on your top secret red phone in the closet, you got a call about a certain someone who wanted to come out of retirement and go into space. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, that was that was outstanding. So I had a grant from NASA. This is back in my early days, and I had a project from NASA to look at. Again, we didn't know this is this was 97, so this is almost 30 years ago. So we did not really understand what happened to muscle protein and body protein in space flight. So I got a grant to study that. And we had a little bit of idea because a colleague of mine named Peter Stein, a great guy, he was in New Jersey. He's older than me, retired now, but he actually did some of the initial work and did a very nice job, in all fairness. And so I had a study, long story short, to use tracers uh, and look at muscle protein breakdown and whole body proteostasis in space flight. Okay, so we use this oral N15 alanine, which you've seen me show data on, and then we use a 3-methylhistidine injection tracer. So as you can imagine, it was a lot of hoops to jump through to do stuff like that in space. So anyhow, this flight was going. It was STS-95. The shuttle transport system is how they did that. That was what STS meant. And so I got I got a I got a call. So what you would do is you'd go, okay, your experiment would be selected for a flight, then you'd go brief the astronauts. And the astronauts would sign up for your thing. Now, as you can imagine, it was quite the endeavor to send people into space, so they were expected to do science at the same time. So I had there was a Spanish astronaut named Pedro Duque. I can't remember if he was a pilot or not. Irrelevant. And so I didn't. This was still deciding who the other ones were going to be, and I get this call from NASA headquarters. What would your study be like if your subject was older? And I started laughing. I said, John Glenn finally got his way, huh? Because I don't know, you didn't know at the time, but John Glenn had been lobbying for many years to fly again. Because I don't know if you know the history of John Glenn, a great guy. He was a colonel, a Marine colonel, retired fighter pilot, um, a stud. Great guy too. And he was, after he flew, he became the national hero, and so they wouldn't let him fly again. So he felt cheated. I mean, he only got a couple of rotations around the earth. You know what I mean? And then he went on and he did a dog and pony, and of course, he went into politics and was a senator. Blah blah blah. So here he is now, 77 years of age, and he lobbied, I guess, from that vantage point, and said, "Hey, I'd like to fly again." And so they let him do that, and he was one of my subjects. And may he rest in peace. He was one of the most awesome people I've ever known. He was a great freaking subject. He paid attention to everything. He was adamant about. I mean, just so totally a Marine colonel, a pilot too. So we really had a good time. I spent a lot of hours with him. We bonded over a number of things, talking flying, talking aviation, talking military. I was just he couldn't have been a better guy. He was just one of the nicest, most capable. He was 77. He was 77, Andy, when he flew. He was a freaking stud at 77. It was amazing to me. I was in awe of the guy. I really was. Super guy.
Well, I'm glad you got to have that experience, and I'm especially glad you got to share it with us. Before we part ways, let's give our listeners a call to action. So, for the guys listening, smart, driven, knows he's slipping, right, willing to put in the work, what's the one thing you can do right now to start moving in the right direction?
I I actually say emotion is lotion. You heard the old saying, motion is lotion. I just think any activity is better than where we are. And, I have 3 dogs at home, 4 on the weekends, and so I am, religiously walking them twice a day, you know what I mean? Get yourself a dog, man, go for a walk, it's that simple. The problem is that everybody thinks when you talk about working out, you got to go spend hours in the gym and lift weights and do all that stuff. You don't. You don't. I still lift and go to the gym. I don't even like it myself. I've been doing it my whole life. So there's a many other things you can do. Find something you enjoy and do it. Swim. I don't care. Golf. Something. Motion is lotion, or lotion is motion. So motion is lotion. Yeah. So just keep moving. Just keep moving. And then the other side of that is I think you got to look at seriously at nutritional things that will help your life, especially as you age, because it's just not. There's a lot of difficulties with age, and people don't eat as much as they should. They eat less protein. The body's less resistance to the effects. So this is why I think supplementation is more and more important. I think with aging, and people don't get that. You know what I mean? Like when you're 20 some years old, I don't know, unless you're like a competitive athlete at a high level, does it really matter? Like physiology for a 20-year-old, that's why they fight our wars. I mean, you can do anything to those guys and they still come back from war. But when you're 52, it's a whole different freaking story. So,
Absolutely. No margin for error. Everything needs to be dialed in. Well, Arnie, I'm very grateful for your time. I know you got to get going, but I want to thank you again for joining us today. This is really a special episode for me, and I appreciate it.
well, thanks, Andy, for having me on. It's always good seeing you every year at the conference. You're one of my front row buddies there. I always sit beside you there. I sit in the front row. You sit there to learn. I sit because I can't hear, and I need to be right up where I can hear. So, but I enjoy seeing you every year. I appreciate your invite to be on here, and keep up the good work in your field, please.
Thank you, sir. Likewise, keep fighting the good fight.
All right, it was good talking to you. See ya.
Take care. Goodbye.
Bye bye.